Welcome to the Nanotechnology Entrepreneurship Network podcast, where entrepreneurs who have transitioned ideas into the marketplace share some of the lessons they have learned as they navigated the technology development pathway. I'm Lisa Friedersdorf, Director of the National Nanotechnology Coordination Office. Today, I'm joined by David Zamarin, the CEO and founder of DetraPel, a nanotechnology-enabled protective coatings company. David, thank you so much for joining us. To get us started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. And first of all, thank you for having me. A little bit of an interesting story. I started the company when I was an incoming sophomore in high school. I'm now a recent graduate at my undergrad program. So I've been running the company for a little bit over 7.5 years now at this point. Both my parents are immigrants. My family is not originally from the US. So I grew up in a very interesting environment where my father was always kind of involved with business, and he was pushing business and pushing this idea of being, involved in whatever thing that I could think of. And whereas my mom and my mom's side of the family was incredibly focused on education, there was such an emphasis on getting the right education and making sure that I would be a competitive student. And so I had an interesting dichotomy with these two drastically different worlds. Not to say that my dad didn't care about education. That's not at all the case. But the difference was very stark. And my dad would always bring me into a bunch of business meetings when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And at the time I dreaded it. But now looking back on it, I very much appreciative of that. Whereas my mom and my mom's side of the family wouldn't stop about, just making sure that I was on the right educational path and involved in all types of extracurriculars. So I was kind of entrepreneurial from an early age, but it wasn't up until high school where I kind of broke free, so to speak. And I was very fortunate. I went to a very good public school, one of the top schools in the country that you had to test to get into. And I was fortunate that program really kept me honest. I had to look at myself and look at my peers and say, wow, what makes me any different than anyone here? And it was pretty much nothing on paper. So I got involved with all these different extracurriculars, all these different clubs. Didn't think I was going to be in anything involved with chemistry. Didn't even know if I knew. I don't think I even knew what chemistry was until like sophomore year when I started taking it. But I was lucky enough that the school was very rigorous, and I also had the opportunity to be a part-time undergraduate student at the University of Pennsylvania while in high school. And I took real college classes for real college credit, which I later transferred to my undergrad program. And that's kind of the very high level background of what I do.
You mentioned that you took some classes at UPenn, and I understand that you did some work at the Singh Nano Center, which was related. Was that while you were a high school student and doing those classes that you were able to access those facilities?
That's right. That's exactly when it happened. My freshman year, I was involved in a youth entrepreneurship program in Philadelphia. And I took it because I just wanted to stand out. And there weren't that many kids in that program. It had nothing to do with the school. So it was a little bit different. And from there, I was able to get involved with Penn's campus and Drexel's campus. And I really built a lot of confidence. I was, kind of not scared anymore to really, I never really was, but I particularly developed confidence in talking with older individuals and college students or doctors and PhD candidates and faculty and staff. And so that's when I kind of realized, I wanted to start a business where I could keep my shoes clean. It was actually very, very simple. I had this idea that I could come up with a film that could be peeled off whenever my shoes got dirty. And the background was that I got a small gift from my grandparents for getting into my high school. And I combined that with some of my own money for my entrepreneurial endeavors as a middle school student. And I bought myself some expensive pairs of sneakers, way more than I had ever spent on shoes before. And I wanted to keep them clean. It was that simple. And I didn't know anything about chemistry at the time, like I said. So one of my mentors recommended that I start a completely different idea, different business, which was a shoe cleaning company for local university sports teams. And from there was when I started running what I call a real business. I was making some good money for a ninth grader who came from very little. My parents were very not well off when I was growing up. And so because of that, I was making this money and I didn't necessarily know what to do with it. So most of it just stayed in the bank account, which was great. For a ninth grader, eventually I actually ended up selling the company 4 months after starting it, which was a huge endeavor for me. It wasn't a ton of money up front, but over the course of 4 years or so, it amounted to a little over $150,000. So that for practically a freshman was an insane amount of money. And fortunately, I had very strict parents, so I didn't get to spend any of the money either. And from there, I just kind of, after selling, I realized that nanotechnology on the consumer side of the industry became very popular. Obviously, nanotech has been around for a very long time, for over 3 decades. But at the time when I was involved, I just kind of had an interest in chemistry in general. And so after I sold the business, I started looking into nanotech. And there was a particular company that went very viral that year in 2012, 2013. And I started looking into the research, and I actually purchased the product, and it was incredibly harmful. So I had to buy this full body suit and a respirator mask to apply it. It ate through plastic. So it was a pretty harsh chemistry, but very effective. And I wanted to purchase it. It was very expensive, and I waited 4 months for it to come, but it was so backordered, I actually never got it.
And that product that you were buying was a coating product?
Yes, it was. It was a 2-part system. Fortunately, I actually never got it because I didn't know at the time. But the reason why they were so backordered and then eventually had to cancel so many orders was because, aside from the basis of their technology being really harmful, the actual practicality of the product was that it dried white and it also ruined fabrics. It wasn't made for fabrics. And that was my intended use at the time. So I ended up not getting the product. And after hearing this kind of set of news, I realized that I wanted to do my own research. And so I reached out to, it was actually Dr. Shu Yang, who's one of the leading researchers at Penn, a very fabulous mind. I just wanted some mentorship. I just needed some advice. Had a few questions, nothing crazy. And so I asked for an internship. I asked if they would be interested in helping me or letting me use the facility for their research, which they weren't. Otherwise, I had to have to give up all the IP. So that was kind of a no-brainer for me. I said no. But the good side to that is that I was able to take classes at Penn, and most of those were in economics and whatnot. But I also had some polymer chemistry courses that I was taking in my high school. And in addition to that, I had a friend of mine who, again, another random connection I made, I reached out to a PhD student at Drexel, and he had a lab that he was using outside. And that's where the initial research actually happened.
Yeah, so the powerhouse connection of Penn and Drexel is really great there around the Singh Nano Center. I really enjoy visiting there. So it's a pretty amazing story that you had expensive shoes that you wanted to protect. You tried to buy a product that you found out was more toxic than you wanted to deal with. So you decided to design a product that used nanotechnology and was not toxic like the one that you ended up not getting. Is that in a nutshell how things happen?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's all I want. I just wanted a non-toxic version of that product.
So I understand where the money came from. So your money came from your shoe cleaning, and that helped you do the development and get things started?
Yeah, a lot of the initial research I actually did myself while I was taking these classes, and I was getting a lot of advice from, I call him a friend, or he was really an advisor at the time. This guy was just a very accomplished student who recently had graduated, and his help on some of the different types of particles, that's where I really started to learn what nanotechnology was. Because up until then, I was just doing the basic chemistry principles and trying to come up with some products by synthesizing or mixing different components. But eventually, once I learned about what different particles achieved and different types of theories like surface roughness, once I started learning about that, that's where things kind of took it to the next level. And I did eventually contract an outsourced lab to try to do the work, which for 4.5 years actually did not get done. So I actually did spend a lot of money that didn't get us anywhere in development.
Is the nature of your coding based on the hierarchical structure that is enabled by the nanoparticles? It's that structure and not the chemistry itself.
I personally think it's a combination of the two. I think there are multiple different facets, and we have a couple different reactive components in there that work really well together. So, I think some of the chemistry is actually very important for certain effects. In general, the hydrophobicity or the superhydrophobicity that we primarily look for, that's kind of entirely made by that hierarchical structure that we're talking about. But some of the added components, such as like the oleophobicity, which is not really given to us by the main particles inside the product, those are more a combination of the other chemistries involved.
So is it a spray coating that you can use on anything?
Yeah, so our website looks like it's very consumer driven, and it is because we were on Shark Tank. So we wanted to keep that momentum going. But the main portion of our business actually is B2B. We work with manufacturers, specifically in the textile space, but we also have non-textile products. We're working like on anti-graffiti coatings, for example, and stuff like that. And in that case, yeah, I mean, the general purpose of the product is a spray, but it's one of the key factors of what I was looking for when developing the product was to make it as versatile as possible. Because I was a little high school kid. I didn't have the ability to have specified products for specific application methods. So we made something that was very versatile. So we can do any type of dip or pad based process. We can do any type of spray process. And most of our B2B clients are looking for like a dip and pad application with heat curing involved.
Very cool. So you mentioned Shark Tank. So I don't know that I have talked to anyone who's been on Shark Tank. Can you describe that experience a little bit?
Oh, it was life-changing. Great story on how I got on there and everything. But the experience itself was a little daunting. I was 19 years old when I went to film. I was already in college, but it went very well. We ended up pitching and I got 4 out of the 5 sharks to commit to a deal, ultimately taking a deal with Mark Cuban and Lori Grenier. So overall, the experience was amazing and it completely changed the life of the company. If it wasn't for Shark Tank, I don't know if I'd still be running this or not, because that's kind of what brought us up and made me realize that what we had was widely applicable and it resonated with so many people because within the first week or so, we had made just on our website alone, $300,000 in sales. And that was, at the time, again, it was a lot of money for the company. Prior to that, we didn't really have much.
So can you talk a little bit about your IP strategy? And then I also want to hear about your team.
Oh, yeah. Would love to talk about that. The team in particular is a very dear component of the company to me. But to start with the IP strategy, we have a pretty robust strategy. We care about our IP very much. And initially, actually, when I went on Shark Tank, I actually got the question about what's the IP behind it. And I was very much not sure whether or not I wanted to go the route of filing for patents. But ultimately, that is what we did. And I realized that we wanted to be incredibly secure about what we were doing. We knew what we had was incredibly unique. And not only was the formulation incredibly unique, but the 4 years or 4.5 years of development of the product, or even potentially a little bit more than that, what it really boiled down to is we realized that the chemistry was one piece of the puzzle. The other big piece that we didn't think about and was the issue that we had with all these different labs that we tried hiring over the course of 4 years was the actual process on how to incorporate these particles, because we're taking incredibly super hydrophobic particles and we're not even using a different carrier. We're not using solvent as a carrier. We're infusing them into water straight away. So it's a little bit of an oxymoronic process. And because of that, we realized the process was very unique. And after knowing that and getting some custom equipment and whatnot to produce that type of stuff, we end up filing for real IP. And now the IP strategy within the company is that every single product that we work with, we do everything in-house. So right now in the facility that I'm standing in is our facility right outside of Boston. Pretty much every single facet of the business is here. We don't really outsource anything. So for example, all of the R&D, the manufacturing, the production, the fulfillment, the shipping, everything that you can think of is done in-house. We don't outsource anything except for the printing of our labels, which are then applied here, and the printing on our corrugate boxes, which are then also packed here. But the reason why I mentioned Shark Tank was such a big component of everything was because that moment was what exactly allowed us to bring in all of these different pieces in-house. It was a culmination of years to get to the level that we were at now with this beautiful 40,000 square foot facility that we have that we've put a lot of work into. With all of that in mind, the key catalyst to all of that was Shark Tank. But the thing that kept it going, the momentum came from building an amazing team. And so that's why it's a very dear topic to me. In particular, right now, we have 17 people full-time. That ranges from our chemical R&D staff. We have 4 people full-time on that department. We've got all of our finances in-house, operations is in-house, marketing is in-house, sales is in-house, production is in-house, so on and so forth. The reason why I mentioned that is the cool thing about the company is when I was running it in college and high school, all the people that were involved at the time were my peers, all my friends. I didn't have anyone that had any real experience. We were just a bunch of kids that didn't really know anything and had some theories. But I was a solo founder, so for me it was really hard. And I realized that when Shark Tank had aired and we had the success, that the first thing I really needed to do was to bring in some experts or some people who had real life experience. And so the first hire I made was my CFO, and he was the first person in the company that was over the age of probably like 23. He was 33 at the time, and he was very bright mind. And from there, we realized that having someone who's experienced is wonderful. Someone who's not committed to school, who doesn't have any commitments like that, is wonderful, albeit, some people have families and whatnot. But, that was kind of the main criteria at the point, was to find graduates. And so we slowly started increasing the average age from 22 or 23 to maybe like 30. And we had like maybe 5 or 6 people in the company at that point that were full time. And I was the youngest by far. Everyone else was in their like young or mid 30s. And then it was the first real executive hire that we made, which was in 2018 at the end of the summer. It was a big component of what we did. I like to call Tarek, is our COO, our first gray hair in the company. He really doesn't like that.
As the oldest person in my office, I will attest, I wouldn't like that either.
Well, I meant it in good spirits. The impressive part about it is that the key component of it is that here I was at the time, I think I was 21 when I met Tarek. No, sorry, I was 20 when I met Tarek. He was a mentor in an accelerator program that we were a contestant in. And we reached out to each other looking for just a mentor-mentee relationship, nothing out of the ordinary, but we clicked so well. And he actually lived at the time where our previous facility was, he lived like, literally right around the corner. So this is something I always did. I always offer people free office space, like anyone who's my peer or college students, anything. I'm always more than happy to share the front end of our office space as a collaborative workspace because we have so much space. And so I offered him that too at the time. And he was just, working from the office because he had just come off of 2 of his last exits in 2 different companies. And, he had a very successful resume of his own. And we just started hitting it off more. And we realized that it would make a lot of sense to join forces. And that was kind of the real big component that further spiraled the company to where we are today. And from there, it was all she wrote. I mean, we ended up having the median age from there probably go from like 35, maybe 37 to now, I think we're actually close to 50. And, our head of R&D, for example, and his wife, who's also a chemist, work here. We just relocated them from Ohio last year. Juan Harufe is our chief research officer. And he's got 37, almost 38 years of experience in chemistry alone, former VP of R&D at Rust-Oleum and Sherwin-Williams. And after those types of experiences, the fact that we're able to, for whatever reason, convince these very successful execs to come work under the tutelage of some 23-year-old kid. I don't know what it is, but it's very humbling. And I'm very much appreciative that we have such an amazing team here.
Well, it sounds exciting. It sounds like it's been a lot of fun. When you look back, is there a particular decision that you made that in retrospect you would do it differently?
Yeah, I do those kind of decisions every day. We have 3 rules in the office. One of which might not be super appropriate, but it's painted on our wall. It's get shit done. The second rule is we don't fail, we learn. And the third rule is C rule number 1. But the second rule in particular is a very important one because there are a lot of decisions that have definitely negatively impacted the company that I personally have made or others potentially have made. But that's kind of encouraged here. We're an entrepreneurial company. We try to be as entrepreneurial as possible in everything that we do. If you're doing something new, if you're so innovative and you're trying to be very, very unique and have a real company, not just a hobby or a couple $1 million a year business, when you're really trying to make a true change in the world or have an impact in your respective field, you have to be bold and you have to take certain risks. And we do that quite often. The downside to that is that if you're wrong on your assumption, then there's some, call it failures. But for us, it's just learning opportunities. So I don't think I would do anything differently, particularly because I've learned from almost every single decision that we've had.
If you were to meet a young entrepreneur, what advice would you give them?
I mean, every time I have a conversation on a daily basis with young entrepreneurs, I always tell them the same thing. I mean, a lot of my peers, especially Babson college students, the school that I went to, look at me as like this, overnight success or whatever, especially after Shark Tank, after my freshman year. But the reality is it took 7.5 years to get to this so-called overnight success. And even then we're not where we want to be. So the biggest piece of advice I always offer is that it's really hard. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And the reality is that if you really want to commit to something, if you are that serious about a business, you really have to be 150% in. And they're going to be very, very high highs, but they're going to be incredibly low lows. And you have to be prepared for that. So the greatest piece of advice I always give is just getting started and making sure that you can take that first leap. From there, things can work themselves out. And there are multiple ways of maneuvering a business.
Well, David, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with us today. And for those of you who are listening, if you're interested in joining the Nanotechnology Entrepreneurship Network, please go to nano.gov/Nano Entrepreneurship Network or email nen@nnco.nano.gov.